Welcome to Pathway to Peace with Terry McIntosh. I'm Gary Morris. This is a timely message in search of a positive truth that brings healing, peace, and safety to the individual as well as the entire nation.
Hello Saints, Terry McIntosh here. I'm currently sharing our testimony with you for the glory of God. If you're just tuning in, you can catch up by going to youtube.com, locate the search bar, and enter Pathway to Peace with Terry McIntosh. That'll pull us up. This is episode 22. When we stopped last week, I was on a Spy Out the Land mission trip and was back to Tel Aviv where the Lord instructed me to go to Shiloh. I didn't have a clue about where it was or why it was important to go. My plan was to visit Haifa, a major city that sits on top of Mount Carmel in the north. So the next morning, I boarded a bus en route to Haifa. Frequent stops to load and unload passengers made it a long trip. I dozed off at some point and woke up to see a road sign pointing the way to Shiloh. I was stunned, really. I knew not where I was in relationship to geography, but I knew the Lord was showing me the way to Shiloh. Well, after reaching Haifa, I managed to contact a young undercover student missionary couple who lived there. While visiting in their home, I inquired about Shiloh. He pulled out a map and said, "Yes, there is a Jewish settlement there, but you can't go. It's very dangerous. The Arabs will kill you." Oh no, I thought, this can't be good. The Grim Reaper was raising his ugly head. I had been finished with life and death issues after the Vietnam War, and I had settled into a comfort zone that contained love, peace, and security. I had a precious family now. They needed me and I needed them. Things were different in a perfect way, and the warning scared me now that it became a real possibility. I wondered if my previous sense of not getting killed had been wrong. I didn't think God called me there to kill me, but all I was hearing about Palestinians said that they were anxious to kill Christians and anyone who supports the existence of the Jewish state. And of course, I recalled the saints back home prophesying that I would be killed if I went. So going to Shiloh would be a real test of faith. At least, I had the assurance of eternal life if it was time to die. But I was worried. I knew I had to press forward regardless. How could I face the Lord if I refused to go? Well, getting back on the bus, returning back to Tel Aviv, I watched for the road sign pointing the way to Shiloh. I never saw it. I've never seen it again, although I traveled that road 100 times back in those days. Not to say it wasn't there, perhaps it was upgraded along with other highway changes, but the sign I saw that day was not to be found anywhere. It was a one-time sighting for me, but it served to confirm the command, "Go to Shiloh." I had come this far on faith and couldn't turn back now. I was either in or out. There was no middle road. Get in or get out. I gulped down a big dose of fear. I located a reluctant Jewish taxi driver who agreed to drive me out to Shiloh in the occupied territory called the West Bank, but it was for a hefty fee. He said that a Jewish man was killed in the area 1 week ago and that he would only travel in daylight. So I agreed and off we went. It was an intense journey, expecting a terrorist to attack the Jewish car at any moment. I suspected my life could be over when I first got into the taxi. Just sitting down in the seat required an act of faith. When we arrived at the settlement, we entered the guarded gate with permission and drove through it. Now at the time, there were maybe 200 or 300 residents, I don't know. Streets were empty and peaceful. An armed school bus arrived and let students off while the parents gathered their own children. I got out of the taxi, I spoke to them, and engaged a woman in conversation. It was general in nature. She wanted to know what I was doing there, and I just said I was curious about life in the settlement. The taxi driver was anxious and prodded me to hurry because we had to get back to the safety of Tel Aviv before nightfall. I was bewildered by the Lord's command to go to Shiloh. So what was there for me to do here but go back to Tel Aviv? And we did without any problems. I was very relieved to still be alive. Later, I concluded that my visit to Shiloh had been a test to demonstrate that I could trust the Lord to protect me. I wasn't there to preach or do anything great that day. I was just there to obey the word of the Lord, just to trust Him. It did break that strong sense of fear that accompanied the visit. I had worried about nothing. While that is true, and in retrospect, there was much more involved. It was a root prophetic call regarding things I knew not of at the time. And it's still just coming into its final stage of completion regarding the call upon my life. Now, for the record, Shiloh was the first permanent capital for the people of Israel. It was the site of the tent of meeting. It housed the Ark of the Covenant. Hebrews made pilgrimages there for major feasts and sacrifices, and Judges 21 records the place as the site of an annual dance of maidens among the vineyards. Other history includes that of the prophet Samuel's mother Hannah praying at the temple in Shiloh. Samuel was dedicated to the Lord in Shiloh. The Lord revealed Himself to Samuel in Shiloh. Hey, I was tested at Shiloh in the same place. And of great importance, unknown to me at the time of the visit, Joshua had apportioned the land among the various Israelite tribes who had not yet received their inheritance. Now, all of this and much more at this place called Shiloh. I wasn't familiar with scriptures detailing land boundaries and really didn't give a hoot about it one way or the other. Why should ancient history be of an interest to me? I wasn't a historian. I wasn't there to record history. And what happened back then shouldn't matter now. Well, Saint, it did matter, but I only realized its true significance in May of 2014. That was 22 years later from the date of my first visit to Shiloh. And it had started with a dream prior to this trip. In this dream, I was inside a broken down house. It had fallen into a state of disrepair, as though neglected, broken down, and shabby. It was beneath the ground, hidden from view, but it had once been a magnificent palace. I climbed my way to the ground surface and saw two men. One of them held a measuring line in his hand, and I watched as he stretched it out to its furthest point. The man turned to the other man and asked, "Will he dare to come out this far?" Now, inwardly, I knew that the man was issuing a challenge for me to do it. I was astonished by it. I had scaled up the structure, and he was asking if I dared to go out all the way. The dream ended without further elaboration. I wasn't familiar enough with the Hebrew Scriptures to know that a similar measuring stick was used in Zechariah chapter 2, and it would be years later before I studied it through, and it still didn't connect all the dots for me. All I knew at the time was that I was challenged to help rebuild this neglected and shabby house. At the time, all I could do was spiritualize the dream away. It's easy to do that when we don't understand something. You know, I spiritualized that I was to assist in building up the kingdom of God. Would I be willing to go the distance? I said, yes, I will dare to go out that far. Meaning, yes, Lord, I'm willing to do what you want to have done. And that was true. I was willing. But there was even more to it, as I would later realize. It appears that the challenge to walk out to that furthest point while it's being repaired is both spiritual and natural. I just didn't realize the dream had anything to do with rebuilding the whole house of Israel in the natural sense until more recent times with the advent of DNA that identifies Palestinians as blood brothers and supports the existence of a Bible remnant in the land through Joseph. The original house of Israel was represented by the decayed house in need of repair in my dream. It was underground to represent the hidden existence of the Palestinian house of Israel. The process of rebuilding or identifying had begun. Climbing to the surface represented recognition of Palestinian descendants and their exposure for who they are. And God promises to rebuild, to identify, and I was challenged to participate. I just didn't understand it. But what other conclusion can I reach? Returning home from the initial 2-week Spy Out the Land trip, the family and I prepared to quit work and sell the house. we cashed out our small savings account and advertised the house for sale. The very first caller came out and bought it on the spot. We thought it was very interesting that they were a Jewish couple. God has His own sense of humor and His way of confirming things. The next step was to quit that good job. I did. It was done, and we were flying. The adventure had actually started. We left everything behind and we stepped off the airplane at the Tel Aviv airport on June the 11th, 1992. Through immigration on a 3-month tourist visa, and out the door we went. I was stressed at this new reality shaping up. Where to go, what to do, I didn't have a clue. Susan was full of faith. Andrew was a 15-year-old adventurer. Adam was a 6-year-old just trusting his dad and mom. If you think I had faith, they had more. They had to believe in me. At this point, I completely realized how far the Lord had brought me from spiritual darkness. From being so lost and defiant, I was standing on the ground in Israel. I was now a missionary. Imagine that. Howbeit, one without a plan. I was a man under orders waiting for direction. And for a quick recap, we've answered the call. I've made a 2-week spy out the land trip to Israel. I've returned home. My family and I have sold our properties and quit our jobs. And now we're standing on the ground in Israel without a plan of our own, waiting direction for the Lord. The trip to Shiloh had proven to be a test of my willingness to trust God in the face of being told that I'd be killed if I went. I knew that I could trust Him to accomplish His purpose going forward. So please, Saint, join us next week at the same time and walk down this path with us as we remember the great things that God has done and give Him great glory for it. And meanwhile, may He bless you and keep you. McIntosh out.
You can write us at Post Office Box 766, Paducah, Kentucky 42002, USA. That's Post Office Box 766, Paducah. That's spelled P-A-D-U-C-A-H, Paducah, Kentucky 42002, USA.